Today, we're going to talk about the 4 self-management strategies for our own personal competency. We're beginning a 2-part series about emotional intelligence, our own personal awareness for ourselves, and how we practice this for emotional intelligence. And the 4 self-management strategies we're going to focus on is 1, breathing. We're going to talk about taking emotional inventory. We're going to talk about controlling our inner narrative. And then the 4th one is schedule time for us to recharge. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat podcast, wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. Welcome back. So glad you're here. If you're one of the originals, the OGs from the very beginning of this podcast, welcome back. So glad you continue to be involved, engaged, and this contributes to your life and your work. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. So glad you are here. Dive in. We're in season 6, over 100 episodes now, so you got a lot of content to choose from, and I hope you go back and listen to a lot of the great stuff along the way. My commitment and hope for all of us every time you listen to one of these podcasts is that this is a time, a space, a sacred moment in your day, in your week, for you to be able to step back, to have a few minutes to just collect your thoughts, to think, and then also to be filled. We've been talking about, in the last podcast, talking about breathing oxygen and the announcement of my new book that's coming out. But I hope this space is a place for you to kind of breathe oxygen into yourself and also to collect your mindset and think about the next actions that are along your path. So glad that you are with us again today, wherever you are listening or however you're coming to the podcast today. If you will do me a quick favor, of course, we need to ask this, and I hate that I always have to ask this, but please, if you're willing to do this, rate the podcast 5 stars on whatever podcast platforms or all the podcast platforms that you listen on. That is a huge help to us. If you leave a nice review, thank you for taking the time to just leave some nice words about the podcast. If you subscribe, of course, and share it with people in your network, in your colleagues on your team, your organization, on social media, all those ways. Those are the ways in which the algorithms help to amplify the podcast and help other people find it more easily and helps it share it with more and more people. So thank you to everybody that takes a moment to rate it, to review it, subscribe, share, all those ways. Very much appreciative of that. We've been talking about emotional intelligence on this podcast at different times along the way. Certainly, we've been talking about all that's been happening in the world on this season, during this season, around the Great Resignation. And we've talked about, the importance of as leaders, how do we have a mindset of retaining talent and attracting talent and developing talent around us and navigating our way through all the challenges and obstacles in the world. And also we've talked about emotional intelligence, and we're going to talk more about it today. But emotional intelligence is something that has been widely talked about. It's a phrase that people throw out, especially in the world today, talking about how needed it is. It's celebrated. It's identified as something that's needed more than ever in the world that we're living in and working in today. And with the rate of change and the obstacles around us, how we calibrate our thermostat and our behaviors and our work with other people and collaborations is critical. And so on today's podcast, we're beginning a 2-part series about emotional intelligence and sharing some tips. First, about how we can look ourselves in the mirror and practice some personal awareness strategies. So we're going to talk about ourselves first on this podcast. And then on the next podcast, we're going to talk about how do we have awareness of other people and practice some elements of emotional intelligence that way. So excited you're here for today's podcast about emotional intelligence. And we're going to take a quick break, pause for a second, and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. Recent studies reveal that 58% of performance, of all of our performance, so think about this, 58% of all of our performance is tied to emotional intelligence. And when I hear that and I think about that stat, we know that for every task, every meeting, every encounter, every project, every relationship, we bring a certain percentage of our IQ, our intelligence and how we process information. We bring a certain percentage, the skills and things we've learned along the way to every situation. We also bring our own personality, so the ways that we are oriented uniquely to come to the table or come to that situation, we bring a percentage of that. But research and studies shows that 58% of every interaction or project, task, engagement, relationship is tied to emotional intelligence, which again, if you need some definitions of quickly, we'll kind of run through that in just a second, just to refresh you on when we say this term, we don't want to just say emotional intelligence without defining what it is. But emotional intelligence and tied to this 58% of our performance is our own awareness, our ability to listen, and then the response that comes up. And so, again, let's make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So defining emotional intelligence is your ability, or my ability, to recognize and understand the emotions in yourself and others. So first, recognizing the emotions in yourself and others, and then not just recognizing and understanding those emotions, but then our ability to use this awareness to manage our behavior and our response and our relationships, and to develop the relationships around us. So it's not only recognizing and understanding the emotions in ourselves and others, but then our ability to use that awareness to put our own, response and behaviors and actions into place to kind of calibrate our response for that. So we know that, the studies are saying 58% of everything is connected to our ability or inability to practice this kind of emotional intelligence. We also know that employee engagement and employee experience, when we're thinking about it from a work context, we know that meaningful cultures, that more and more people are wanting this. We know that places that are kind of breathing oxygen into employee engagement and employee experience and creating that kind of thermostat culture, a meaningful culture with the people around us, we know that those types of environments are anywhere between 2 to 5 times more likely to hit their targets, to delight customers, to engage and retain their employees, to become what is referred to as a quote-unquote best place to work, et cetera. All of these things that we know, there's higher retention, there's higher customer loyalty. All the research shows us that as we engage the people around us and have a more meaningful culture with them and have a higher level of emotional intelligence, that all the positive metrics also go up. Things we know are that people right now, more than ever, you've heard me cite this statistics on past podcasts, that research and studies telling us that 9 out of every 10 people surveyed across industries now say that they would actually take a pay cut. They don't want a pay cut, but they'd be willing to take a pay cut if it meant they could work and be a part of a more meaningful culture. So people want to engage their mind and heart. They want to be a part of something greater than themselves. They want to feel valued. They want to contribute their unique gifts and strengths. And they want to know that the culture they're a part of is a part of in building something bigger than themselves, and that they are seen as an actual human being, not just a statistic or somebody who's there to do a particular job. So engagement of the mind and heart is a huge component to performance. We know that in the age of the Great Resignation, which again I just finished this season, a 4-part series on the Great Resignation. So if you didn't hear that, go back and listen to that. But over 30 million people in climbing have just quit their jobs. And that's reached record highs and is going to continue to climb. So the war for talent is on. And all the research is showing that emotional intelligence and our ability to lead and create cultures that are meaningful for people is our greatest competitive advantage. And so all of this stuff matters so much. So we're going to talk about, on the next 2 podcasts, we're going to talk about these 2 different sides of emotional intelligence: personal competency, our own personal awareness of ourselves. And then on the next podcast, we're going to focus on social competency, our social awareness of other people. And we're just going to talk about a few, kind of self-management strategies to how to build your own personal or, social competency with the people around you. So, today, again, we're going to focus on personal competency, which this is what I see. So my own self-awareness around what I see, and then based on what I see and I feel, what is it that I do? What's the behavioral action response? My own kind of self-management or self-regulation based on what I see and what I do. That's personal competency. And then next week on the next episode, we'll talk about social competency, which is, our own social awareness about what we see and feel that others might be feeling and seeing around us. And then based on that, what is it that we do? How do we regulate our response and our behavior so that we can develop the relationships of the people around us? So we'll focus on that next week. But for today, we're going to talk about the four, not the only 4, but we're going to just focus on quickly with the time we have today, 4 self-management strategies for our own personal competency. 4 self-management strategies for our own personal competency, our own personal awareness for ourselves, and how we practice this kind of personal competency and personal awareness for emotional intelligence. And the 4 kind of self-management strategies we're going to focus on is 1, breathing, which is a theme, again, that I'm big on right now. But we're going to, again, talk about it not only literally, but metaphorically. So breathe. We're going to talk about taking emotional inventory. We're going to talk about controlling our inner narrative. And then the 4th one is schedule time for us to recharge. And so the first one, the self-management strategy that I will focus on is this idea that as a self-management strategy for all of us to practice emotional intelligence is to breathe. That we know that our brain demands 20% of our oxygen supply to just complete kind of basic functions and complex thinking and, managing our motivation and our moods. And so like oxygen, it requires, our bodies require oxygen. But we also know that breathing helps us regulate our emotions. And so our own personal competency awareness really begins with our ability to kind of take in a deep breath and breathe in some good oxygen that our bodies might need so that we can begin to be able to be personally aware of how we might be feeling and what we may be seeing in the world around us. That oftentimes we don't even notice it, but I've mentioned this with many teams and organizations recently, is that how often in an average day do you catch yourself, or do the people around you catch you, where you're kind of holding your breath? Or you might be stressed, you might be intense, you might be really concentrating on something where actually we're actually constricting our breathing. And yet we know how important it is to kind of take that deep breath and to allow our bodies to have the oxygen that we need. in my book, Breathing Oxygen, again, that's coming out this summer, I tell a story about some free divers, research around these free divers, these people that dive down into the ocean without oxygen tanks and everything. And the fact that some of these, free divers, these kind of the best free divers in the world, can go underwater. It's really fascinating. Can go underwater and hold their breath anywhere between like 6 and 12 minutes and then come up. And as people have studied these people, that they're like, man, are these fish? Are these mermaids? Are these mermans? What are these people that can go underwater and breathe for 6 to 12 minutes on their own? But really, they've noticed that their lung capacity, the capacity of their lungs, is about 2 times the size of normal humans. But the fascinating part about it is that none of these people were born with that lung capacity double the size of other humans. That's something that has been practiced, that they have learned how to do so that they are more fully expanding and using their lungs in a greater capacity than we are. And so as an image for emotional intelligence, part of our self-management strategies is our own, learning how to breathe, to regulate our own emotions and our own thoughts, and taking time voluntarily to practice breathing, as simple as that may sound. The second, self-management strategy that I want to just take a moment to talk about is that our ability and a strategy in the moment. If you're thinking about how do I practice this kind of emotional intelligence, is to just quickly in each moment, after you've taken good breaths and you're aware of your own feelings and what you're seeing, is to take emotional inventory, to actually step back and ask yourselves, what are you feeling? What are you feeling in the moment? And what is causing specific feelings and responses in you? As we become more emotionally intelligent, we will start to understand what are the triggers that trigger us emotionally. What are the behaviors, the responses, the causes that seem to heighten us emotionally? And it starts with us being able to even just be aware and take emotional inventory. And when we become more aware of the emotions, the causes, the things that trigger us, we're then able to have a better response based on our ability or inability to kind of take emotional inventory. The third self-management strategy I want to point out for today is the idea that all of us need to control our own inner narrative. It's been said, research tells us, that average humans have anywhere between 12 to 60,000 thoughts in an average day. So you may be wondering and thinking, wait, am I on the 12,000 or the 60,000 thoughts? Are you a big thinker or maybe a smaller thinker? But wherever you fall on the scale, I think that's amazing that studies show that we have an average between 12 and 60,000 thoughts in a day. But unfortunately, the research also points out that 80% of the thoughts that are identified, they identify them as negative, as judgmental, as, they are, thoughts about worries and anxieties and judgments of ourselves and of other people and kind of negative in nature. 80% of those, 12 to 60,000 thoughts. So an amazing amount that they seem to kind of slant towards that negative side, unfortunately, in our own inner narrative. And yet they also point out that 95% of the thoughts are repetitive. So think about it from an average human standpoint. If 80% of those are negative or judgmental of ourselves or others, or worries, anxieties, negative kind of thoughts that are creeping around, and they're also repetitive, it means that practicing our own emotional intelligence and a self-management strategy is we've got to become more aware of what are those inner narratives that the stories we're telling to ourselves, and many of which are not true. The stories we're making up about ourselves, about what we're capable of or not capable of, or a story we're making up about somebody else when we don't really have the context or don't really have all the information. And these kind of repetitive thoughts that we feed make us not at our best performance, don't bring out the best in us. So controlling our inner narrative begins with the strategy of being able to make sure that we question ourselves. Is the story, the thought that I find myself repeating, is that story true? Is it accurate? Is it helpful? And then what is a different story, a different narrative that I'd like to tell of gratitude, of appreciation, of positive things that are happening around me, of positive opportunities that I have right in front of me, a celebrating of somebody else, of gratitude. This kind of thinking is something that we feed, and if we don't, it seems that we tend to slant more towards that negative side. So to be able to control our inner narrative is another self-management strategy. And then the last one that I'll mention just for today is to schedule time to recharge, to block off time in your schedule to recharge. Did you know that Americans alone in right before the pandemic, so not even during the pandemic, right before the pandemic even, 768 million days of vacation went unused in America. 768 million days of vacation that people had, that they perks and benefits that they had, that they just went unused, that people didn't take advantage of the time that they had to get a break, to take a rest, to recover, to have a vacation, to whatever that may be. And that equates to about $66 billion of lost benefits that the normal employee in America lost. And so what the research really points out is that we tend to have an unhealthy association with the term rest. And so really, as we think about our own emotional intelligence and our own emotional health, really a key component to that is we are at our best when we take time and block time to recharge our minds, recharge our bodies, our spirits. And then when we come back, we're actually better at what we do. And so in Breathing Oxygen, I go into a lot deeper examples of ways in which we can do that. But the 4 self-management strategies I just wanted to put on the table for today's podcast are, if we want to practice our own personal awareness and our own personal competency around, emotional intelligence, 4 things that all of us can practice today are breathing and becoming more aware of what are we breathing in and what are we breathing out, to take emotional inventory and see what are the causes or the types of situations that seem to be triggering our emotions so that we can better understand them. Then how do we control our inner narrative? The stories that we're telling, are they true? Are they accurate? Are they helpful to us? And if not, what narratives do we need to be feeding differently? And then lastly, are we scheduling time, accurate and good time, so that we can recharge, recover, rest, so that we're actually better at what we do? We know that calibrating our own personal thermostat for our own awareness, our own response, calibrating our personal strategies for that response, and then also what we're going to talk about on next podcast about our social awareness, we know that it all takes practice and intentionality. We are the thermostats. Our own internal temperature sets a temperature externally for others based on our own awareness, our own response, our own behaviors. So like always on this podcast, I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder for this week. What are you aware of with your own personal feelings and responses lately? If you step back and you think about how you've been feeling and the things you've been aware of in your own life and your own work, what are you aware of with your own personal feelings and responses lately? What temperature do you want to set for the people around you, for yourself and for the people around you? And what temperature is needed with your team? What are you aware of? What is the temperature that your team or your relationships is needed right now? And what is that awareness or that response that's needed? On next episode, we're going to dive deeper into kind of part 2 of this discussion, where we'll focus on social competency and social awareness around emotional intelligence and provide a few tips on practicing that kind of social awareness and social competency. Remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet stimulate progress by recalibrating their thermostat and breathing in good oxygen to themselves and to others together. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.